All right, in this part 2 of the VLOOKUP, we're going to be going over other lookup functions. And you'll note, for those of you who are familiar with Excel, going, why aren't you including the HLOOKUP in here? Well, it's because I never use the HLOOKUP because it's a useless function and I'm not going to teach you it. But if you really want to know, it works kind of similarly to the VLOOKUP, only transposed. All right, the first lookups we are going to look up that I do actually think are useful are the match function and the index function. The match function, which I did not make look nice like I did this VLOOKUP here, this match function returns the number corresponding with the position of the lookup value in the array. Now I know that may be a little bit confusing to start with, but I'll go ahead and explain it. Let me read these other 2 bullets here. The lookup array is one-dimensional, unlike the table in the VLOOKUPs, and that makes sense. In a VLOOKUP, you look up an entire table that is 2 dimensions. In a match function, you only look up one column, and you look for a match in that one column. In the match function, it is useful for finding column numbers on lookup formulas. So if you wanted to look up like the first name on this, you could go ahead and look up first name on this and it will return 2, because this is 1, 2 away from participant name. And that's a good way to get around counting the columns. If you have this ungodly large table with like 50 columns in it, and you don't want to go and count where each one of your fields is that you're looking up, you could just do a match function and it'll find where those positions are for you. So that actually works out really nice for that. Yes, other things this is useful for, and I didn't write it here, but it's very useful as an in function. So if you want to find if something is in a collection of values. So like I said, if you had the number 2, and you had 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, you could look up, say, is this number in this data right here? Okay, let me give you a quick example of how the match works. I go ahead and I say equals match, and then I have a lookup value. And I'm going to look up this 2 right here. And of course, I lock it in for not a whole lot of reason right now, but I'm doing it anyway. Looking up this 2, and I'm going to be looking up in one column right here. And I'm going to be looking up in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this one column. And then the match type is exact match, 0. So we want to do an exact match. Once again, exact match almost always. And this should return the answer 2, because this is the first and this is the second element in this array. The first element is number 1, the second element is number 2. This might be easier if we use letters instead of numbers. You know what, I'm going to do that. Look up A. A is not in here, so it could not find a match, aka it's not in this column right here. But if we wanted to change this to A, B, C, D, E, then you can see that it is at ordinal position number 1 right there. It is the first element in this column. If we change it to C, it should now return 3, because C is the third. And once again, we can use F9 to see exactly what Excel is looking at. It is this array in here that says A, B, C, D, E, and we are looking up F9, we are looking up C in 1, 2, 3. Oh, C is right there. Let's return 3 for this match. And of course, if we change this, we're looking for F. It gives us an error. There's no F in there. The match function is great to use if you're looking for this is in something. If you're looking at medical procedures, you'd say, do any of these people have knee problems? And this is like arm, back, knee. Oh, yep, somebody does. This third person does have a knee problem. So it can be useful for something like that. It also is very useful when used in combination with an index function. An index function I wrote here is similar to a VLOOKUP, but it's more flexible and less user-friendly. Sometimes you will need something that can do something that a VLOOKUP cannot do. Such as sometimes, like I went over in the first example here, you'll need to look up something based on multiple columns, such as first name, last name, and a VLOOKUP cannot do that without doing that hunky-dory sort of concatenate 2 columns to try and look up something and concatenate multiple columns in the data source. An index can get around doing that in a slightly more complicated way. Another use for it is that if what you're looking up is not in the leftmost column of the data, such as if you're looking up the record ID, which is over here, you can look up an index and saying, this is what we're going to return and this is what we're looking for. That's another thing that an index is good for, is getting around these limitations that a VLOOKUP has. That being said, it is a little bit less user-friendly, so let's go ahead and look at an example right here. I'm going to go ahead and index. And for an index, you want to put in an array, and this is often going to be a two-dimensional array that you're looking in. It's used much like a VLOOKUP in that the array you're looking for is essentially the table that the VLOOKUP accepts. So go ahead and select your entire two-dimensional array here. I'm going to click F4 to lock it in. And so in this array, it's saying we are going to return a specific row number and a specific column number. So if we said we want to return column 1, row 1, it would return record ID. If we wanted to return column 2, row 5, or whatever this is, it would return this number right here. It's very simple, kind of in that sense. You give it an array, you say which row number do we want, which column number do we want. The row is where the match comes in, because the row helps the index function find which match it's looking for, because the match helps the index find which record it is looking for. So if we go and we say we are going to look for a match, we are going to look up the record ID right here. I'm going to click F4 to lock it in, comma, and we are going to be looking it up in this record ID right here, this one column right here. We're going to be looking up. In this column, it is going to look up where is 5568 in here. And then from there, always do an exact match. And then for the column number, we are going to be returning column number 2. So this row, this column, we want this salary right here. So column number 2 in this table right here. And it gives us the exact same answer that we got for this one right here. This is just another way to do it. And of course, if I go ahead and copy it down, it is now looking it up for 5570 and we get the 53,000 number. Some quick notes right here. If we're doing an index match based on 2 VLOOKUPs instead of 1, it is slightly more complicated as it requires an array function. If you know how to perform this, you can find a guide online. Oh my gosh, I was so cruel when I wrote this. I'll quickly go over how to do this. If you don't understand it, don't worry. This is a slightly more advanced step that I wasn't planning on going over in this Excel training apparently. And you can get away with just using a VLOOKUP 98% of the time. If I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to look up something based on 2 columns, first name, last name, just put the values there. We don't want this Sydney and we don't want this Hercules. We're looking for this Hercules and this Sydney. So what we're going to have to do is we are going to index, look at the same table. For the row number, we have to do a match, but we have to match looking up the number 1. Why we are doing 1 is because we are going to multiply finding Hercules in this array versus finding, what are we looking up, Sanford? We'll look up Sanford in this array. You'll see how this works in just a moment. The lookup array we are looking for, I'm going to put this in parentheses, is we are going to be looking up Hercules, and we're going to say equals to this column right here. And what it's going to do is it's going to go through, this is Hercules right here, and it's going to go through this. Is this Hercules? No. Is this Hercules? No. Is this Hercules? Yes. Is this Hercules? Yes. And so it'll go through true, true, or false, false, true, true, false, false. And then if we go and we do that same thing for the last name, it'll go through here and say, is Sanford equal to this? And it'll say false, 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 true, true, false. And it'll go through like that. And as we found out in the last section, Excel treats trues and falses as zeros and ones essentially. If you multiply this by this, it'll go through here and for each corresponding position, it'll multiply false by false, which is 0, false by true, which is 0, and true by true, which is 1. And for that one record where there's a true and a true lining up, then it'll say that is the record we are looking for. And of course we are returning column 2. And if I go ahead and click enter, it's not going to work here. I'll go ahead and try it. Oh my gosh, it did work. What is going on in this world? This is an array function is what it's called. So typically you need to hit Control-Shift-Enter and it'll put these little squiggly brackets around it. I don't know if there's an update in Excel, but that is majestic. I'll have to look that up. Maybe you don't actually need to hit Control-Shift-Enter for array functions, or Excel just recognizes this index match for 2 columns now. But either way, oh, that's really impressive to see. Okay, I'm quickly gonna go over this because once again, this is optional. I get that this is difficult, probably beyond the scope of this training, since I'm only going over the quick basics of Excel. Is if we look here, if we look for Hercules in this column right here, it'll give us false, 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 true, true, false, false. And the same here, it'll give us a bunch of falses and 2 trues. False, 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 true, true, false. You see there's an asterisk right here. If we go ahead and we multiply these two together, it'll return a bunch of 1s and 0s. False times false is 0. It'll go down here, and true times false is 0. But true times true, that's a 1. So if I click F9, you see 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and then that 1 in there. And then if we are matching a 1 in this array, as we learned from the match earlier, it goes through and it says we're looking for the position of this value in this array. And this is at position 5 or so. So the result of this should be about 5. Yeah, it is at 5. And so for this index at that point, it's just looking up a table and it is returning this row in this column. All right, and that is the unnecessarily complicated way to do this problem. If you had to take away anything from this, match is how you can find things in one column or one row. An index function is a less user-friendly VLOOKUP. And if you want to solve this problem, just use a VLOOKUP. So you're going to go over to VLOOKUP practice problem number 2. And we have here a bunch more columns that you can look up. If you want to challenge yourself, if you felt like you really knew that VLOOKUP the first time, I would challenge you to go ahead and try using an index match for this. If you're still struggling a little bit, or you'd still like some more practice with the VLOOKUP, then go ahead and do a VLOOKUP for this, because both of them will work for this. And you can go ahead and see my solution right here at the plus. Best of luck. I'll show you how to do this in a bit. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and start with a VLOOKUP. I'm going to look up this participant number, F4 until I lock it in, comma, I'm going to go over here, select all of our beautiful data right here, F4 to lock that in, make it absolute, I'm going to hit comma, I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to delete this because it clogs up my data, or my function, don't like how it looks. Column index number, and the 2015 contribution amount. Well, I don't know how many that is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 9 away. 9. And I'm going to give it a 0 for exact match. You could just also write false. And that is how that would work right there. I'm going to go ahead and copy this down. So, Meredith Bryant, 799. You did not contribute anything in 2015, correct. All right, perfect. I'm gonna go ahead and put these in comma, so that it makes it look a little bit more numbery. And yes, as you saw here, it was actually quite a challenge for me to find 2015 contribution amount, despite it only being 9 columns away. Part of that is because I'm hesitant to go ahead and count every column in a big table, but I'm gonna go ahead and try and speed this up with a match right here. And I'm going to match our column header here, 2015 contribution amount in our data. And you have to start on this left column, otherwise it's going to throw everything off. Go over here, make sure you go all the way till 2015 contribution amount, and I'm going to go even further. F4 to lock it in. Then of course we want an exact match. If I do that, oh, I did not lock it in appropriately. We want to lock the row this time. So I'm gonna, there we go. We want the dollar on the 6. And so you see at this point, this is referencing the header. This is referencing the participant number. And so I can actually go and I can copy this to 2015 salary, and it'll give us how much money they made in 2015. And we can copy it to total account balance. And if we look up for Franklin Collins, 809, where are you at? All the way down here. 2015 salary is 208,000, and their total balance is 363,000. 363, 208, perfect. It's working great for us. Now that would be the answer to this, and if you go, I imagined I used a match down here too. I did, and I gave a big explanation for how and why I did that. I'm not going to go ahead and read that right now, but you saw for yourself the match made it a lot easier to go and find these different field headers in our data. Now, congratulations if you got that. For those who did an index, I'm going to show you how to do that now. I'm going to quickly go through that. Index, we would go and we use this entire array. Let's get the whole table. And for this one, for the row number, we can just do a match here. Get rid of that. Match this number. Once again, I don't like how that looks. And we want to match that number in this. That is how we would find the row number in this participant. And we want to find the column number. And I'm going to do another match. Going to match this right here. Once again, it's not hurting anything that this sheet explicit reference is there, but I'm going to go ahead and get rid of it. Lock in the row number this time. I'm going to do it right. Going to go and we're going to look over on this sheet. Going to get all of these column headers because we're looking for which column it's in. And then we are going to do an exact match on that. Right parenthesis to end it off. And it should give us, if we copy it down, hopefully it has given us the same results that we got here. Yes, it does appear that it is. Okay, perfect. All right. That is the end of the VLOOKUP section. I hope you learned something, if nothing else, how to do a VLOOKUP, because that is the thing you're really going to need to know if you plan on doing any extensive work in Excel. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time for the pivot table section, which is the second most useful function. And as you saw, if I go over this, I have the pivot table, I have the VLOOKUP, and then I have everything else. So and row value, this is where all the other functions are. The pivot table is the only other thing where I was like, this deserves its own section. It's really nice and important. So go ahead and watch that pivot table one, I'll see you there. All right.